Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Paving the Ways podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest on, Sophia. Sophia is a first-generation small-scale farmer preoccupied with making the dairy industry kinder to the animals that it depends on. She started the farm with money saved from an apprenticeship and a rucksack full of her worldly possessions. It was built with salvaged materials, borrowed tools, and a motley connection of animals. I met Sophia, I think 2 years ago, very briefly in a small village called Machynlleth in Wales. And she was at the time, from what I remember, living in a transformed old school bus or double-decker bus on a goat farm. And I was just really fascinated by her story. So I invited her on the show. So welcome, Sophia.
Hi, it's really nice to be here.
Yeah, and Sophia, if you're watching on the video, is actually you're in your bus right now.
Yep.
Yeah, amazing. So to give people an idea of what your life is like, what could a day as Sophia be like for you at the moment?
So it depends really on the time of year. Like living with animals and living on a farm is really seasonal. At the moment, it's the quiet time where sort of drying the animals off. So it's a lot of, I say late, getting out of bed late. That's maybe about 8 o'clock. In the summer or the spring, it could be as early as 5 o'clock in the morning, which is great because you do get to see some sunrise. But my life basically revolves around the animals that I work with. So it's their feeding cycles, their birthing cycles. The dairy is a little bit unusual in terms of milking, so we don't separate the calves or the kids from their mums, so it's not quite as clockwork as a regular dairy. It's quite based on the individuals and their needs. So because they're raising their calves, some mornings they'll have like lots of milk, sometimes they'll have a little bit of milk, and you sort of have to plan the rest of your day around that. So sometimes if you don't have a lot of milk to process, you're saving what you have for the next day. Other times you're making 3 different types of cheese at the same time in a tiny processing room. Yeah, that's it. Feed animals,
Wow.
Make things out of the animal products, and take care of the land that the animals are on. That's it.
It's so refreshing to hear that you keep the calves with the mothers, because that's always the main thing that plays on my mind when I think about buying dairy.
Yeah.
But you guys have like a small scale farm. You have, what did you say, you have cows and goats, is it?
Yeah, so we started off with goats. I didn't originally expect to work with livestock because I started off my farming experience as a vegan, really assumed I was going to be a vegetable farmer, and then worked at a place that had goats as well as vegetables, and completely fell in love. Ruined the rest of my life. I was like, that's it, this is what I'm like. My life has to have goats in it. And then obviously went down the route of goat dairy as opposed to goat meat. And the cows were a later accident. I just keep adding animals to the farm. They just sort of arrive. Definitely didn't intend to have cows. In fact, I think when I started, I was under the impression that cows would be a really bad idea because they were going to be harder to look after. They'd take an entirely different skill set and infrastructure. And I had the ideas, like, if I get cows, I'm going to have to work harder to offset the carbon, because obviously, you need a lot of water and a lot of feed to get the same amount of milk that you need. Whereas with goats, they're kind of sweet garbage eaters. So you can put them on a bit of scrubland and they'll convert that really easily to milk. Whereas with the cows, you need quite maybe more of a complex grazing system, and you need to make sure that you're really meeting their needs to be able to have a mostly grass-based system. So but anyway,
interesting. I never thought of like the small differences between raising goats and cows.
And they're big and chunky, and you can't see this, but I'm 5'2" and I do all of the handling myself. And if you're thinking all of a sudden like these huge stonking great big Frisian cows, it didn't really feel like as much of an accessible thing for a female dairy person. A goat, if one of them's injured, I can literally hoist one onto my shoulders and wander it to where it needs to be, whereas the cow, you're looking at like a completely different strength, machinery, all that kind of stuff. So finding a way to have them in my life and on my farm has been quite a trial and error process. And yeah, luckily I found some really sweet cows. They're actually destined for dog food. So we got, there are very lovable scrap cows. I shouldn't say all of them. We have one of them that's actually from a nice dairy down the road, but the majority of them are cows that have been designated as not particularly productive by other large industrial dairies. But there's actually nothing wrong with them. They're just like 4 and perfectly sweet and still have an awful lot of life and love, and sort of a bit mad. So yeah, we take in those. And yeah, we're up to, can't remember how many I counted earlier. 6? That's it. That's now the total.
Well, 7 now with a new calf, you say, is just been born. Yeah. So what kind of changes had to happen? I guess you had to be quite open to go from being a vegan to then having a dairy farm. Yeah,
it's quite a strange process. I, growing up, had a really thou shalt not kind of view, where I knew, you know, it just looks bad. Like you start like to learn as you're growing up about what happens in the farming industry, and it didn't sit well with me. And I think the thing that I was empowered to be able to do at that time was just to cut it out of my diet. And then later, the older you get, the more nuanced the discussions are around food. You start to realize that there is no one answer. There's no perfect diet, and no matter what you do, you kind of have to become comfortable with the idea that human beings living on this planet and eating in the way that we do and having a society in the way we do causes harm, whether that's to other people in different countries, or, I mean, it's so complicated. And I just realized that I was living in a city and I was completely divorced from my food, and that the vegan food I was eating that came out of packets wasn't necessarily better for the environment. So I thought I'd actually go and learn, realized that I had a lot more interest in food and farming. Like, I had an allotment at the time, and I kind of realized this is the thing, this is what I want to follow. And I guess just starting to expose myself to people with other views, turning up at other farms and mixed farms, and just having to be open to that. I'm going to go somewhere and there's going to be animals, and they're going to be, you know, they're going to have different ideas, and really quickly learning that actually the people I was staying with really cared about their animals, and you could see that they had a really great life and a really good connection with their animals and how they lived. And I've definitely visited places where I've stayed and I thought, okay, I really appreciate the skills that you've given me. I really appreciate the learning that I've had in this place, but I would do this differently. Like, there are aspects of it which are still tricky. Like, even though I could see that they care about their animals, there were still aspects that I found difficult. And it's just every stage that I got to gave me a little bit of learning and understanding of why people do things the way they do, and often a little sliver of, but why do you do things the way that do? You know, like, oh, okay, you do that because your granddad did that, and because that's the setup that you have on your farm. And I really understand there are a lot of pressures on modern farms. You know, I talk a lot about the fact that you can't really blame the individual farmer for the choices that they're making, because they're under a lot of financial pressure. So it's harder for somebody who has a 8th generation dairy farm to decide to completely restructure how they handle their animals and totally change how they sell so that they can get the best like price for their milk, versus me, who's there with a little notebook and a rucksack wandering around going, oh, when I start, I'll just do it like this.
Makes me think of that phrase they say, like, everybody's a good parent until they have kids.
Yes, yeah, definitely. But I do, I think it does make it easier, like starting from scratch. it really, yeah, just easier.
And then do you use them for meat at the end of their lives, or with cows and goats, do you have to like slaughter them by a certain age for them to be worth eating?
So I think that is the case in a lot of places around the country. We are, currently a little bit unusual in the fact that we've always found something else to do with them. So any of our milkers, they've got a guaranteed retirement. So if you work with us, I like to think it's kind of like a team. We like work together. So if they've put into the system, part of how we price the milk is it's priced not just to be able to afford them a good quality of living now when they're milking, us a quality of living as the farmer, but also there's that extra bit on the price which says we can afford to continue to keep you in hay when you're older. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's great, and it changes how you work with them, because you really are working as a team. Like, you really are like, come on, patience, don't kick the bucket, because that's your retirement fund.
Yeah, it makes me think of dogs, like, and horses. So often it's like kind of viewed as really evil that we do horse riding and use dogs for jobs, like blind dogs and stuff. But actually I think animals are quite willing to work if they're valued and they're seen, like you said, as part of the team or part of the family.
Exactly. And I mean, the deal with dairy is we have, without a doubt, overbred animals to produce more than they would produce naturally. So it's quite simple to be able to have a dairy animal. They breed, and so that's another. So there's quite a few things actually that are a little bit strange about our farm compared to another farm. So they also don't have to breed every year. So we release a billy goat, for example, and then if one gets pregnant, great. If they don't get pregnant, we're like, ugh, freeloader, and then it's fine. They try again next year, or they go into an early retirement if they really do have fertility issues. But it's a little bit more freedom, a little bit, not really autonomy, because they're in heat, and it's kind of humanizing them a little bit to say that they kind of go, well, I don't like that billy goat, I don't want to work. It's a little bit more complex, but it's a nice way of working with them. And I think I've lost the plot of what we were saying.
I don't know, but I was engulfed in what you were saying anyway. So
that's it. There are too many complicated bits about the farm. The once a day milking system. Basically they produce enough for their calf or kid plus extra. And if you were to leave them with their calf or kid, unless they're a supremely low producer, they can get mastitis or things like that. So once they are pregnant, you kind of have to milk them every day or take away the excess. So it's a really easy system, I think, if you're working with them and you're making sure that you're not, I guess it's probably about trying to stay within the most natural rhythms that they have, like allowing them to breed when is right for them, keep their calf at the end of the day, and you as the dairy person, keeping an eye on their body weight and their food intake, and making sure that they can continue to produce milk and feed their kid or calf throughout the year. And that's it. It's a really easy system in comparison to the rest of dairy, I think. But
What would they do if they weren't living with humans and they had excess milk?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of dairy animals, I think mastitis is quite it's quite a problem. I wonder, it depends if they would breed or not breed, because if you just had females loose in the wild, they'd live quite a happy, nice wild existence. Saying that, I do wonder whether or not we've interfered with livestock to such an extent that it would be quite hard to just leave them wild. Like, I know if we were to just open the gates on our farm, we have some animals who are genetically predisposed to be brilliantly wild. They're really hardy, they never have hoof problems, they never get worm burdens, and they produce a relatively small amount and could happily keep a kid or a calf and have no problems. But then we have a selection of animals that do need quite a lot of human intervention. You know, they can't go more than a couple of months without having, you know, a hoof limp or getting like worms and a problem with that and having to have us intervene. So yeah, it's difficult. I did an apprenticeship in Norway with a farmer who was quite amazing. Really taught me that there are different ways to be able to do dairy. He was the first farm that I worked on where he basically lived, his farm was right next to a nature reserve, and he would just open the gates to his farm and allow these goats to just roam this amazingly huge like amount of land in comparison to the, you know, this country where the farm I have now is 6 acres, and we're in the process of moving to a new bigger farm which has 100 acres, and this nature reserve is like thousands of acres. And he'd just let these 60 goats roam free, yodel when it was time to milk, and they would all come back down the mountain to be milked, and like their kids stayed with them the whole time, and it was perfect. But he did have more of a kind of Darwinian idea, which was, well, you definitely don't call a vet. It's, you know, the animal has to be able to survive in the wild, and that takes an element of tough love where you just have to accept that a weaker animal is going to die. It's quite a smart, natural approach. I am a massive softie and cannot do that. I am a terrible breeder because I kind of take the, if you got hooves and you're under my care, I'm gonna mother the crap out of you. So yeah, probably not a great idea. Maybe if I was a bit tougher, we could release them into the wild, but my heart, it won't allow me.
Yeah, wow, I find all this so fascinating, all the small little details of dairy farming that I'd never really had like such an insight into. Do you find that there are many farmers doing things in a similar way at the moment?
I think it's something that when I first started, I didn't know there was a name for when I was looking for it originally. So I think it's probably about 8 years ago that I started on I'm really going to learn farming. This is what really like a structured approach, not just like I've got some self-sufficiency books and an allotment, but really targeted. I'm going to give up my job, I'm going to hit the road, I'm going to visit farms that are doing what I want to do, and I'm going to keep building that skill set. And I couldn't find anyone who was doing it about 8 years ago. Whereas now in the UK, in this amazing kind of spontaneous generation, there's been lots of different little farms who've all started practicing. And it wasn't until quite recently that everybody kind of came together and said, oh, you're doing that and I'm doing that, and it really feels like a movement now, which is really lovely. But I think there's probably still under 20 farms in the UK that are practicing calf at foot, and there's, I think to my knowledge, there's only 2 farms who don't also have some kind of meat business at the same time.
What's it called? Yeah. Calf at foot?
Calf, yeah, so it's calf at foot, or kid at foot. They stay together. Yeah. Which is really lovely.
Something I've thought before about eggs is like, yeah, free range eggs. I would only, well, yeah, at the moment I would only buy free range eggs. But then if everybody suddenly wanted to buy free range eggs, there probably wouldn't be enough space to capacitate for that supply or that demand. Do you think that like this is sustainable or possible on a
large scale? Yeah, so actually I'm so lucky that we've got our first UK large scale dairy who's trialing it at the moment, and they're doing quite well. So I definitely suggest everyone who's interested in this check out both the calf at foot dairy, which is great. They're sort of medium size and have been doing this for quite a while. And then the large dairy is called the ethical dairy, and they're trialing it on a scale that I can't even dream of. Like I don't want that many cows. You know, I like being able to know everybody's names. And after a certain level you can't, but it's really amazing to see somebody large scale trying these methods. I do think personally I would like everybody to, this is an awful thing to say as a dairy farmer, but like eat less dairy. Like I do think it isn't about converting every dairy farm that we have in the UK to this method. It's definitely about, again, just for me personally, lowering your meat consumption, lowering your dairy consumption, and choosing these like more sustainable, more humane options. We're actually trying to put that into practice. So on the new farm that we moved to, the plan is to also do oat milk. So we can offer like maybe a more seasonal approach, where we can say like, this is the dairy that the land can sustain, and then the land that isn't as, it's like prime growing land, that can be put into food like vegetable production, oat production, and then the animals and us are really using the land in its most wonderful capacity. So hopefully, yeah, more projects like that where it's both and.
Yeah, I think seasonality is something that really needs to be introduced into supermarkets, because you go to the shop and you see all of the vegetables and all of the fruits every day of the year. And if you've never been on a farm or like looked into it, you don't even necessarily question it. You just think that everything is available all of the time. And it would be really nice to be like you would get in a vegetable box, like this is what we can grow at this time of year, and you kind of get what you're given.
Yeah, I think so. And that is something that's really great about selling direct, is having that contact with your customers. So I know everyone who buys from us, and we have a really great communication. So they can tell based on like the level of cream, because it's all unhomogenized. So you get that like layer of cream on the top of your milk. They can tell, are they on like the good grass at the moment? You know, you can send out a message and post a picture on your Instagram and say, hey, if you notice a change in the flavor, it's because it's autumn and they've been eating all of the acorns. And it's a really nice, it's a nice thing. And sometimes it's awful. Sometimes you have to turn around and say, I'm sorry, guys, all the batches of cheese have failed because it's so cold. And the place that I make the cheese is uninsulated. So it's too cold for food this week. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, and that's so real. Like, you know, otherwise it's like this thing that you would get in a job where you just have to show up any day of the week, even if you're feeling really sad or something, and this like expectation that we have to have everything's perfect all of the time. And it just sounds so authentic that you can like speak to the customers and be like, oh yeah, we fucked up, but like that's just the way things work.
And luckily, you know, we've got such an amazing group of customers. Like, they are genuinely forgiving and find it really funny if we've said, we actually dropped the milk, like cry over the spilt milk, because it's really... And that's
and how nice that you can share that with them.
And they're great, you know, they really are incredibly forgiving.
And it's so human, like it really keeps that connection between like farmer and customer, which I think is how we can buy foods that are not ethical or damaging, and because there's no connection between where it's come from, you just see it in the packet and you buy it. Whereas like creating that connect between the food that we eat and where it's come from is so important, I think, to change the world.
I really think so. And I think if a lot of people, I mean, and this is, you know, it's an incredibly privileged position to be able to have a countryside community where people buy from me and I can say, meet the animal. You know, it's a lot harder to do that in a city. You know, it's difficult. Even, you know, if you did have a city farm, the chances of it being able to produce enough food for a big enough populace, if you're working with animals, is quite slim, because they do take a lot of land. But it is lovely here to be able to say, if you buy from us, you have a right to come to the farm. So we're an open farm. So anybody who doesn't buy from us can also come, but I mean, it's just a bit stranger, like if they don't know us. But you know, we say, if you buy from us, you have the right to come and meet the animals. You can see how they're kept, you can form that bond and relationship. And I think it's quite a change. People don't mind paying over the average amount for milk if they know who it's come from that morning and what life they lead. And it's, yeah, it really creates the bond, not just with the consumer and the farmer, but also with like the person and the animal, which
rather than just seeing some milk on the shelf and being like £4 compared to a 50p, like why would I pay that extra? But then when you can know that they're like, that's part of their retirement fund and their like enjoyable livelihood, then people are, I guess, a bit more.
That's great. I'm definitely taking notes. I'm like, great, people would pay £4. That would be great.
Well, I definitely love paying more if it's like from a small company that I know are taking care of the animals.
Yeah, I mean,
otherwise I don't really like buying dairy or meat products.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, again, I'm the same. Like when we're not producing dairy on the farm, we're oat milk drinkers, you know, and we go around to other people's house and they're like, do you want milk? And we're like, nah, sorry.
Yeah. And there's this like, I think like the vegan, like it's almost become a debate, a black and white debate, and you mentioned at the beginning all these nuances, as if like if you buy something vegan, the vegetables were looked after, like they in my opinion are just as conscious and as sentient as any being on this planet. So like it's really the quality of production that I'm looking for in the food that I buy these days.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I also think it's hard not to polarize the sort of vegan and farmer debate. And I know it's quite I think people can see that as being, I guess, like a tension point. But for me, I see like what I'm doing and what vegan activists are doing as two halves of the same essential coin. Like I think it's such an important part. I do think that you need, in order to have that kind of social or structural change, you need some people going, hey guys, this is messed up, you need to fix this, we're going to educate you on this. Then you need some other people tinkering in the background being like, okay, the system's really broken, how do we fix this system or make it better or make it run smoother? So yeah, I do think both. You just need both. People need to like definitely work together and understand that, I don't know, there's that argument between, you know, veganuary or re-January for regenerative farming, and I'm like, same deal, guys.
Yeah, it's like we've all got this deeper knowing of what a more beautiful world will look like. We're all just going our different ways, and if we could just maybe accept that we're all going different ways about it to the same place, we could be a bit more harmonious.
Definitely. Like I just think it's all essential. I think so many people out there are doing great advocacy work, and just work together, it's gonna be great.
And we spoke a bit before the call about you weren't sure whether you were gonna like you didn't know whether you would slaughter them in the future, and I got this like sense of this real like openness and questioning for you, which I think is a very like revolutionary or evolutionary trait that to hold in order to kind of like build things as we go along and see what we want things to look like without thinking that we know.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important. I mean, if farming has taught me anything, it's that my really entrenched belief in like a system and an ism doesn't really work when it's put into practice and you see how things run. And the more I'm around, like, I have a lot of respect for meat farmers. It just so happens that for us, we've always found another use for the male animals. Like we've always found that they make either excellent pets or excellent conservation grazers. And when there is that other role for them, then yeah, great. It seems, why would you turn somebody into burgers if they've got an excellent role? But I do understand that small scale meat production is also a really important part of the food system, and depending on how the world develops and depending on whether or not somebody needs to step into that void and say, oh, actually dairy animals can form a really important part of a human food chain, then yeah, I'm definitely not wedded to any one future. And I think that that's just, I think it's the only way you can be on a farm, because you honestly never know what's going to go wrong. You have to be quite adaptable from start to finish.
Yeah, adaptable. So you're about to move, but at the moment you're living on the farm, and who works on the farm?
So it's me and one of my partners, so I'm sure we'll cover that in a minute. But my partner Scott and myself. It's a bit of an odd year at the moment because of COVID. So I think we normally have quite a few volunteers, and we often have quite long-term volunteers who end up becoming friends or sort of just living here and then helping out around the place. At the most, I think we've had 6 people staying in this double-decker bus at one time.
Nice.
Which is quite a lot. But I really love the community aspect that farming can bring, and if you have a lot of people who are really into the project and have different ideas, then that's excellent. But yeah, at the moment it's pretty low. It's the 2 of us just doing our thing. And when we move farms, we'll be joining forces with another farming family, so we'll have like a proper little ready-made like nucleus community, which would be really nice.
Yeah, community and farming seem to just, like, in my experiences anyway, just come hand in hand. It's like, it takes me back to days where, I don't know, you would have excess carrots and there's no point holding on to them. You may as well give them to your neighboring family because they're just going to go bad otherwise. And it's like this real like reciprocity, however you say it, that happens when you're farming and working with food and products that don't go up in time like money does.
Yeah, I think so. And the type of farming that you do, I mean, again, when I first started off in my farming journey, I only really understood farming to be one old man and a tractor.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't until I started volunteering places that I was like, oh, this is amazing. There were like young people and women and just like, oh, you can farm in like all shapes, sizes, colors, and you can have this social life around a farm. I mean, if I was trying to farm alone, I don't think there'd be so much time for socializing, and I can understand why that's really has such a negative impact on a lot of farmers' mental health. But if you have a farm where you say, yeah, the doors are open, you can come, you can stay when you're traveling, when you're finding yourself. If you are in a position like me, I wanted to learn about farming, but had already gone to university, had already gone so far down a certain path and realized I couldn't afford to go back in time, and definitely couldn't afford like a second degree if I wanted to do agricultural studies. I don't come from a farming background or a farming community, so for me volunteering was the only way of accessing that. So yeah, I think it's great, more people on farms.
Yes. Like the farmers that I've met have been probably some of the most open-minded and loving and wild people that I ever come across. So I remember when we learned like 2 years ago when I was in Wales, you had your 2 partners. Could you just speak a bit to that, because
Sure.
It's really interesting.
So I have probably been polyamorous now for almost as long as I've been trying to learn to farm, so about 8 years. And I think it started off because of just geographical considerations. I think my first experience with polyamory was probably like some kind of awful daytime TV show. It was probably something like Wife Swap, where they had some like weird polyamorous family and they were just like, you know, it was like really cringy and embarrassing and like, oh my god, so taboo. But I guess it must have stuck in my brain, because then years later, when me and another partner, not one that I'm currently with, were spending a lot of time traveling and learning and being just in different parts of the world to each other, and in different places, making that decision that we cared about each other and trusted each other enough to try and maintain our bond while still being open to experiences with other people. And that was with mixed results. I mean, if there are probably people out there who instantly try polyamory and are just like wonderful human beings and make no mistakes and hurt nobody. But it's a complicated learning process. And it's something that made me realize through trial and error in that relationship that it could be quite healthy for me. It's probably the first time that I'd had a relationship, what you call a relationship structure, that really suited me. I'm quite driven, and I put a lot of weight on, I don't know if this is gonna make me sound bad, myself. You know, like what I love and what I'm into is really important, and it's the thing that really gives me vibrancy. And I found that often within traditional monogamous relationships, it would come to a point where I would have to feel like I was choosing between my ability to go out into the world and like learn these things and do these things, and the love and affection that I had for someone who wanted to be quite static and build in one place and meet like 100% of their needs through me as a person. Whereas for me, I think I've always wanted to be my own person and to be in love with someone else who is their own person. And inspire each other and grow and all of those really wonderful, wonderful things. But ultimately, I think I might be an autonomy junkie. Like, I do just love having the freedom to make what I want out of a relationship and a life. And polyamory allowed that. It allowed me to meet people who were also building their lives in whatever combination of ways. And there have been, you know, some people have very defined structures within polyamorous relationships. They have things like, I've even forgotten what they're called because it's not the structure I use, primaries, secondaries, you know, they have very like set boundaries. Myself and my live-in farm partner, Scott, we're more open. We have a sort of what's called like a kitchen table polyamory, which is that everyone is equal, and it's quite a nice open domestic in and out. So his female partners and me will be close friends. You know, obviously it's not enforced. Like if you date him, you don't have to be my friend, but it's like the ideal is that you are in each other's lives as a supporting role, which is as important as the romantic relationship that you have with somebody else. And it's really good. I'm sort of what I refer to, again, this is I think a made up term. There's just a lot of made up terminology in polyamory because it's so amorphous and people are trying to have really easy ways to explain what they're doing to each other. I'm like polyfidelitus, which means I am a polyamorous person. I have 2 long-term partners, and for me, I'm committed to those 2 people. Like I'm not actively out there seeking other connections or dating. And if I met somebody new, they'd probably both be very surprised, like, where do I get the time to do that? But yeah, it's very, very committed for me. Myself and Scott, my farming partner, we've been in and out of each other's lives for 10 years this year. And my other partner, Sam, me and him have been together for 3 years. So they're very like long, very depth-filled kind of relationships. They are quite fluid. Like there are certain times where one relationship might end up needing a lot more care or attention, or the other relationship fires you more, and you guys are really in that place and you just have to be very honest with each other, where you can sometimes have difficult conversations and say like, I care about you, I love you, but right now my time or my heart is in like, you know, these directions. And it's all about communication. It's just a lot of communication is what I've learned.
Yeah, it's kind of like anything like veganism and polyamory, they can get all these like ideas and assumptions around what they need to look like. Maybe polyamory is like loads of superficial relationships and you can't get intimate with these people, or they can't be long term, or And it seems like all of your life seems to be about kind of like, or not all of your life, but you seem to be breaking down ideas of what things need to look like in various aspects of your life, from what I see, which I think is really, really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Go on.
I was going to say it's that definitely does seem to be a philosophy that I like to try and employ, a kind of like both and even, or like try and find the median, which is great for me. Sometimes, I don't want to portray polyamory as like an excellent relationship structure that should be rolled out to everyone. I know that I've encountered some people in polyamorous communities who are like, monogamy is for fools, we're not even designed that way, everyone should give it up, man. And I'm like, well, it really works for some people, and and I do think that it takes a lot. And like, I do have one of my partners does have a really he finds polyamory difficult, and that does take a lot of time and discussion. And much like the meat eating question, the polyamorous question of how do you design relationships as you age. Like, I obviously am experiencing polyamory from quite a carefree position in life, moving into a stage where, the business is building, we're creating like a solid base for ourselves when we move farms. Where do new people fit into that? How, if children come into a mix? So there's all sorts of, what are we going to do about life happening, constantly processing. So yeah, I think it's a great way of living for me, and I thoroughly recommend people be open to it as an option, especially if they find they really value like friendships as much as romantic relationships, and if they have a lot of other things on in their life, and perhaps the idea of being one soul well from which people can draw their needs feels a bit much, then poly might be for you. But definitely it's not a one size fits all.
No, I think as soon as you've got like an idea about what something is, or that what the world needs, it's already become a bit too rigid. And fluidity, I think, is something that is one of my key values for life, just like seeing how things unfold. And you can still have like visions and goals, but just being open to giving whatever it is, your job, your relationship, your friendship, space to be what it wants to be.
I think so.
Oh wow, this has been like a really fascinating, interesting conversation for me. So I don't know if you have any like last things you want to say to the listeners, maybe people that are wanting to like lean into something a bit more unconventional but not quite sure how to like break out of their normal life.
I mean, I think I found, for me at least, personal change has kind of come from allowing myself to follow my curiosity. I think it definitely, when I was younger, came from a place of anger. I know, I'm so chipper, it's hard to believe. But it definitely started off with quite like a punk, smash, destroy kind of rage. And that has like really simmered down and turned into quite a joyful curiosity for like life, and finding the cracks in things, and finding your actually a really good piece of advice I got from an NLP coach one time was find your sphere of influence. Like, I think when I first met, I stayed on this lady's farm, and I was, in that, I'm going to change the world, and like, I want to change it in this way and this way and this way and this way. And she was like, breathe. Like, what can you change? Like, what is your particular skill? Like, what, if you're worrying about having to fix the world's, like all of the world's problems, you're probably not going to do a great job at any of them. So be curious, find that sphere of influence, and then commit to it. Like, I mean, that has been such a huge it's been a real game changer for me, like committing to the farm and moving away from a life where I was always chasing these like euphoric peak experiences, and moving into this like enjoying the daily small joys of a life lived in one place. I mean, you know, 19-year-old me is going, ugh,
Yeah.
this sounds horrible. But yeah, it's really done a lot for my well-being, I think, like focusing on what it is that brings you joy, like, and I mean like small comfortable joys, hobbit level joys in your daily existence, and finding that intersection between like that comfortable joyful space and that curious like hunting for meaning space, and then just like commit. It's like difficult and hard sometimes, and I mean, yeah, doing the farm, there have been some really rocky points. There's been points where, you know, me and my partner Scott have lived off rice pudding in a leaking bus for like 2 weeks. It's just really miserable. But if you have that like little slice of meaning, and if you really commit to it, I think it's good. You can do it. I totally have faith in you guys.
Oh, that sounds like perfect advice for me right now as well. Like yesterday I was like, like all this packaging that's happening and all these deliveries, I'm gonna change that. And it's like that phrase, something like tend to the garden that you sow or something. As in that sphere of influence. Like
It was really, I mean, I should really like write her a thank you note and just be like, you changed my life.
Yeah, I love writing letters to people from the past and like reflecting on like just one conversation, how it can just change things for you.
I really think so. And that's like, oh man, I mean, I'm sure that like dudes do this too, but like for me, that has always been like, women in my life have been incredible. Like I've met so many amazing, like through this farming journey, just like kick ass older women who are just like out there, like doing their own thing. And you're like, oh, that's so refreshing. I don't have to do what everybody else is doing, because like, you got, that looks really good. I'm definitely going over there and I'm joining you guys.
Yes. It's like we can be the permission piece for ourselves, but when we see someone else just like doing it their complete own way, it's not like, oh wow, now I want to go and get a goat farm like Sophia. But it's like, oh, I can actually just like do things how I want to do and see how that evolves over the days and years of my life.
Definitely. And I mean, I really, really think like there's so many limiting factors. I mean, again, like not just from like a farming perspective, but in general, like times out there are rubbish. Like it's really easy to kind of convince yourself that you don't have the right kind of education, you don't have enough capital. But I think there are communities out there who are willing to like support you on that journey. And like sometimes if you just try that sphere of influence thing and start really small, you know, like just get to that like next step and next step and next step, and then it just hopefully works out.
Yeah, I guess it always will in one way or another, just maybe not how you think it.
Exactly. And that in itself works really wonderfully.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. I feel so inspired, and I hope that people listening are also similarly inspired by the things that you've said, and like just so fascinating to kind of see the underlying philosophies that flow through the way that you live and the things that you do. So I really appreciate this conversation.
Great.
And if people want to find out more about the farm, I'll put the link in below. Is there anything else that they need to know about what you're doing at the moment?
I don't think so. I mean, in the hopefully COVID allowing in the new year, we will be open for volunteers again. So 100%, if it sounds like caring dairy is something that might spark your passion, if you want to see whether or not goats are your thing, then 100%, like check out the farm. We really appreciate that kind of support, and maybe come visit if you're in mid Wales.
And when you said in the new year, what do you mean?
Oh gosh, yeah, we are in the new year. So okay,
mid-February.
This is definitely farming issues. When I say the new year, I mean the new milking season, which is coming up in like April.
Nice. When this real spring starts to begin.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if you want to be around a kick-ass woman and be inspired by alternative ways of living, you can check Sophia's stuff out. And I'll also put in the show notes those 2 larger scale farms that you mentioned too.
Great. Yeah, they're so worth a check out.
Cool, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. I really look forward to like seeing where the farm and the dairy evolves to, and I really appreciate all that you've shared.
Great, it's been really wonderful, and you have been so nice and caring. I thought this was going to be really scary, and you've made it really easy.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it's been an effortless conversation.